Okay, I'm going to show you a form that displays 3 text boxes. Let's see if it's working here. Yes, okay. And I'm going to walk you through this code so you can see what I wrote to get this to work. Let's just see how my form behaves. I have submit button that's not enabled. I have 2 elements that are required. I called them required, and I'll show you how I define that. And with CSS, they have a pink background assigned to them. Now, you can use a different color than a goofy pink. You can make it more pastel. This is the way I wish people would design forms on the internet. Have you ever come across a form where they make you fill in a ton of things, you click submit, and it says, oh, you're missing one thing. And it doesn't tell you what it is. It just says, go back, figure out what you missed.
Not very often anymore, but yeah, I've seen that a lot.
Or even worse, they give you a new form to refill in because you were missing something. I hate those. Yes, Jonathan?
And the good you have is confirmation from the link from the assignment clicks.
It's, yeah, essentially, but I'll show you. I made modifications to it just to give different names.
Okay, so I should start with copying over.
Yeah, I would copy over that, and I'll walk through this code here as well. But see how it behaves. Now, I think it would be cool that if I actually did type something there like ATM, that then it would stop being pink, like you're good, or maybe go green. So I don't have that part yet. But notice the submit button is still disabled. I can enter an email. I'll just put in an email there. It's still, submit button hasn't gone enabled yet. Until I enter something in the other required element. Look at that, now my submit button's enabled. Now I'm not validating whether I have valid numbers here, because 1 year old seems a little odd. So it's not validating input. But in this way, unless there's something in, all I'm checking is they're not blank. If all the required elements are not blank, then submit button's enabled. Look what happens if I delete my name. Look at that, submit button is now disabled again. So I'm checking every time something changes whether or not to let them click the submit button. You should never, now of course, I also set it, when it was enabled, I did set the required flag on that input as well. So if you went to click submit, it would actually send you to the first item that you had not filled in, which is decent, but I'd prefer not even be able to click the submit button until things are done. And you see that sometimes that with the password, update your password, unless it's strong enough, it won't let you submit the new password. And I think people are getting smarter, realizing that that's the way we should have done this 20 years ago in web pages. Now let me show you the code that does this, and then I'll help you do some troubleshooting. Now, first of all, let me show you the CSS. Look at how this is lined up. I think this is the best way to line up forms. Right aligned labels that are to the left of the text to fill in. The eye, anything that's lined up is pleasing to the eye. Even though I don't need this much space for a 2-digit number, it looks better to the eye rather than having boxes short, long, and jagged. If the things line up in a line, that just is better, more professional looking. And I also centered the submit button. This is all done with CSS. Let me show you the CSS. Back over here, I can open my styles.css. In the styles.css, I have 3 things that I have. This app thing was already there. I left that alone. But I did say anything that has the class name of REQ for a required thing, I set its background color to be that thing. And if I change that color, it actually brings up a color picker if I click on this the right way. Or when I first did, let's see if I went, there it is. When I first did it, it actually brought up a color picker. And it came up for a second there. Maybe I just have to hover over it. It came up for a second. You saw it. There it is. So I have to hover over the word. I can actually do a color picker and choose a color. Let me pick a little more pastel-y pink. A little less. Just a hint that, hey, you're out of color then. Oh, look at that. I even see it updated. Oh, it's a little too dark. Cool little thing that Code Sandbox is doing for me. But that's set in the CSS. We'll look at the code that says that class. Well, let's quick look at the code just to show you. when I make that input down here, I say class name equals, that's LBL, that's the right align. And then in the input, class name equals REQ. And I did put the required word there as well. We're going to come back to that. This means when I click on the submit, if it were active and not filled in, I would have gotten an automatic little message popping up. I decided, then I wrote the code. I got that working. Then I wrote the code to not even let the submit button be enabled until everything was filled in. And we're going to look at that code in a minute. But here's the CSS class name REQ, class name LBL, style dot REQ, then the style setting of a color assigned. Let's choose. Let's try a different color. Let's try a little light blue. I think that's a little more pleasing. Pink is a little annoying. I think that's a little more professional. It'd be cool to actually make it go maybe a little orangish, and then go green when it was filled in and validated. There's the LBL. If I have class name LBL, they become right aligned. So all of these labels, they automatically become right aligned. And because the submit button is spanning 2 columns, and it's a button, not text, text align center didn't work for me. I had to do margin, auto, display, block before this submit button would center.
Wait,
Right?
so
So I am doing a call span of 2. This is a table. Table layouts nicely align things already for you. So then I can right align things inside a table. So I love tables for forms. They nicely align everything. I first learned that when I was first learning Flash or Cold Fusion. Ever heard of Cold Fusion? That was way back when Flash was a thing, and Cold Fusion was a thing too. And everything was tables. Automatically designed web pages. Tables within tables within tables.
can you measure input?
Yeah.
I'm just curious what the difference is.
Okay, so that's the style sheet determining right alignment, color background of things that have those classes. So now when you go back to my JavaScript, you'll understand why I have the class names assigned. Okay, so now back to the JavaScript. Let's go up now one at a time. Notice I'm trying to do some decent function header comments, be consistent. I thought to try to go with dashes there for functions and then big stars around the main header of my program, just to make it look a little classier. So again, do that with your code. Get in the habit of doing that, and your code is just going to look more professional, even though it may not work any better than anyone else's. The people will look at your code and say, "Oh, that's good looking code," just because it's pretty. And of course, the formatting of this does that nicely for us as well. Now, this was something that was already built in the example, where styling of an input. Here's the use input thing that we're use the value and on change. That basically just updated an input value, and we'll see how that's used. But then here's the form that we want to focus on here. That when we, and this was all given to us in the tutorial of forms. So is that the forms? Let's go to the form. Here's the input form tutorial. Basically, I took all of this code pretty much straight up, and all I did was start adding different style input down here. But everything else was basically right from the tutorial.
So okay, that function where it has the onChange e set value, yeah. What's the e there?
Oh, that just is the input variable. We call it the event or the item, the thing that got the change. Think of this as the object that got the change is handled here.
Okay.
And set value means call this function to update the value state variable. So back in comments, let's go ahead and I'll comment our code with that. Basically what we're saying is here is, let's go up to this. A little comment here, updates the state variable. Something I found very helpful as well. Whenever I take someone else's code, as I read through it, to remind myself what they're doing, put little comments along the way to note to yourself, yeah, this is what's happening here. think to yourself, when I'm reading this code in a month or 2 months, I'm going to forget what was going on. What comments will help me remind me what's happening here?
Is this function here one that you added, or was it?
This came right with the tutorial, right here. So I basically copy pasted all of this, and most of the changes I made were right in here. I added multiple inputs down here.
That all goes in the app.js.
Yeah, let me show you. Yep, take you back to that. So here is this is all in app.js. This is just helper functions. Use input is a function. My form is another function that's going to now render my form. So this is my main class, and I decided to start using dashes around functions in my comment headers. So it's going to be in my form component. And just to jump ahead, this is how we use it down here, right? Where's my form component? Yeah, this is what's rendered, and then way down here at the bottom, there we go. I'm rendering my form right there. So that's what will render my form. That's why I have the function my form. This is all the rendering part of my form. So let's look at the rendering part, and then we'll look at the functions that are being used, the handle, submit, and everything. So here I'm defining the form just like they did in their example, but I decided to throw a table in there just to format it more nicely. And it didn't like me unless I put a t-body in there. I'm typically lazy and don't put a t-body, but without the t-body, it complained it's missing a body. So and this code sandbox popped up and warnings over here. So as you use code sandbox, you can click and actually have a console and see what's going on down there. And it even has a little debugger kind of thing there. So make use of that. It's very helpful. If you see any problems or dev tools, there's some ways to actually watch variables and things down in your React dev tools. I hadn't paid attention to them until I realized, hey, what's this? And oh, I can see console messages down there. So very helpful. And now I'm going to shrink it again, get to the right spot there. So there. Okay, so I put all in the table just to style the input a little nicer. So you're welcome to copy the table part and just see how lovely it looks when you format it in a table, nicely aligned. So because I've done tables 1,000 times, I remember table, t-body, tr starts a new row, td starts a new data cell, and that's the enter your name part. See how it has the class name LBL, makes it right aligned. The next TD element on this row is that input. And here's where a lot of the control of it, making it's a type text input, that's standard HTML. The name is username. And now here's how it hooks into the value inputs.username. Remember my inputs is that thing way up at the top, that state variable. Way up here. There's my use state. I'm saying my global, think of this as a global variable. That's probably the easiest way. Inputs global variable is controlled by the use state. Whenever something changes that uses inputs, set inputs gets called. Okay, so any of the inputs get called, they're going to be updated. But inputs is a little more complex object because inputs.username, inputs.age, they are now parts of the input. So it's neat to see a state variable that's basically a complex object, multiple elements in the inputs variable. It's not just a integer. So the value associated with this input is going to be inputs.username. So if I ever change this, put 18 ending in there, automatically that set state is happening, and anything else that's handling the use of inputs knows, hey, inputs has changed, and that's what happens here. This guy automatically gets updated because he's associated with the inputs.username right here. See? That H4 at the top automatically gets updated because use state is changing the variable username. React is saying, hey, inputs changes. I know I need to react and update that. So as I change my username here, that's what's doing that change there. Try doing that in raw JavaScript, and you have to have set on change, get document object with this ID. React has saved you from having to do all that. You just simply say, oh, this H4 is displaying whatever input's username has become since the last time anything happened on the page. So this is React making that whole mechanism of updating this, updates that as well. So that's React doing a lot of work for you. And to you, it's like, oh, big deal, that's changing. But to make that happen, you didn't have to write any code except use that use state thing. So here's the input. We do want to do something. We want to call the handle change anytime the first name or this username has changed. We call the handle change also when the age has changed. Now the age behaves differently because it's a type of number. Its name is age. It also, and notice both of these I set the class name to be REQ. Remember that causes the CSS to show it in whatever background color I chose. But it's also used somewhere else that I'm so proud of I want to show you. Okay, so that's multiple username. I basically copy pasted after doing one, changed the name of it, changed what type it was, and gave an email. This one I didn't make required because they may not want me to spam them. So it does not have a class REQ or a required in there either. Here's the submit button using the call span equals 2, and I realized without the quotes around it, it's not happy. Even though I can do it without quotes in raw HTML, React or Code.io, Code Sandbox.io wouldn't let me do that without putting quotes around the 2. And then it was happy. I was confused by that for a while. Yeah.
So what specific part did you start copy pasting so that it worked out? You started
Oh.
from the first TR perhaps?
Basically, I replaced all of this with my form. So back in the example, I basically had that at first, put in my own elements here, right below the div. I think I still have that last thing in there still. If I look at mine, I think I left that very last thing in there. Oh, I guess I took it out. Oh, there I have that in the app. I still left this in the app, and all I did was add my form right there. So this is the part I added to their code. Left everything else in there the same, and then I wrote all of this as, hey, how do I want to render my my form? So in theirs, did they have a my form? They have a use input. They didn't have a my form. So this is where I put all my code. I made a new my form, basically going off these other examples they gave us here with checkboxes. This one, I used something like that to have text boxes, and basically added more to that. So my form right here, I added all of this, and if you go through recording, you'll be able to see this in depth. So I wanted to quickly just go over what all this is doing, what all this HTML is doing. Mostly it's just straight HTML, but JSX style. Now let's look at that function that I am so proud of. I want to make sure you're familiar with that. Here's the function that I am so proud of, right here. Let's walk carefully through this code right here. Essentially what I want this code to do is when any element that is required, and when they're all filled in, only then does the submit button get enabled. Okay? So I was thinking this, how do I figure out what is required? What elements are required? And I did a little searching, and it didn't take long to find a couple examples of how to do that. And remember the query selector all? You've seen that before in that little example of the book, but it's been a while, so don't worry if it's kind of foggy. Basically, what this is doing is giving me all. Let me put some comments here. Get a list, an object list, an object actually I think they call it a node list. A node list of all elements with the class name REQ. This is what this is doing. Pretty cool way to do that. I just do, I use a long variable name, which makes it a little more readable code, but it also makes for longer lines of code. Required elements equals document dot. I had this all in one line, but when I did save it, it prettied it up this way for me, so I'm leaving it that way. Get element by ID. That means the form. Form 1, give me all the elements that have the required class name set.
Did you name your form 1, or where is that?
Yeah, that's what I named it, the form way down here. Yeah, ID equals form 1. So with ID form 1, that means in that particular form, I'll call that with ID equals form 1. So this is a really powerful piece of code that just says, give me all the requirement elements. If I didn't have the .query selector all, I would get all the elements in the form. And one suggestion for the code to find required elements is then you loop through that, all the elements, and see which ones are required. And then, well, I could do a loop. But then I saw another example that, hey, just use query selector all using this, and it gives me all the ones that have the .req class name set. I also learned that I could do this. I could do bracket required. And that would also work. And I threw that in comments just to show that one or the other will work. Having set required or having the class name required, then I could only worry about checking to see whether the required elements have something in there. So now, this piece of code is basically saying, okay, for I equals 0, I equals less than the length of that node list that this is going to return to me, increment I. This is only logging whether they're, what their values are.
What would be the disadvantage of using a use effect?
I think the use effect to do the same thing. I still have to go through the loop to figure out which required elements have been updated. Because the use effect will get called anytime anything changes.
So I think you can do it either every render or when something changes, depending on whether you include the second section of it. So that's what I was looking at, because like we do for the Bible verse thing, we did that, so where like you had to make the conditionals.
Right.
Chapter or book, chapter, and verse were filled, then it would do something.
Yeah.
But then it would.
That was use effect. Yeah. And use effect did have the conditional inside of it. Yeah. I could put this all in the use effect. Exactly. You're right. So verify required. I don't know if I put that in the use effect. I'll show you where I actually call verify required. Yeah. Where's the handle change? There it is. I had in handle change. Handle change is basically the same as use effect, from what I can tell. So let's see now that code, just to make sure you understand now. Here, all I did, this is only for debugging right here. This little section here, this is just debugging. This little for loop. Just debug the values. I'll just put debugging only. This code is only going through the elements that got returned because I wasn't sure what was in the required elements, because it wasn't working at first. And this little developer here, I couldn't watch that. So that's where this does fall down, is to actually know where you could use your Control-Shift-I and use your browser developer tools. Good luck trying to figure out what's here even on Code Sandbox. You can't watch variables. It's like they're hidden down in some React thing somewhere. This gives you some idea, but I still can't tell what was in there, so I threw this in there. Debug, and if I do a Control-S, it'll format it a little better. There we go. This lists the elements just for debugging. This is the part that checks to see if they're in there. If any of them are blank, then I know that I haven't filled all my elements. So this is basically checking to see loop through all required elements, and you're done if any of them is blank. So that's why I have this. As I go through all the elements, looping through required elements, just like my debug loop did, if blank is triple equal, that means the value in blank is of the element is still blank, then I know they haven't filled all the required elements. I automatically set this variable be filled to be false, and I break. That means I break out of the loop. Break out of the loop. Again, just basic JavaScript, but you need practice going through basic JavaScript to make sure you're learning it. This is just breaking out of the loop. I give you a little time to think about that. Is that making sense? It's pretty basic JavaScript.
What's your export default look like?
Down at the bottom, this guy. I'm just returning my form. And then everything else that was in the example I just left in there just for fun.
So did you not put your own function app in?
Nope.
So you left the function app as part of that export default?
Yep. This is at the end a separate, just because that's the way they did it. You know, remember there's multiple ways of doing the document.render, and I just thought, well, all my examples are doing this. I'm just going to go with the way the examples rather than rewriting this part. So back in the form then. There I'm checking to see have they all been filled in, and now I turn that submit button either enabled or disabled based on whether or not B for Boolean variable filled. That's my naming convention of variables. Booleans get a B in front of them, and then I could have called it B is filled, but I just called it B filled. That means Boolean, whether or not they're all filled. And I'll put a little comment here. Enable or disable submit button based on results. Just on check balance. So if they have something in there, notice I'm going to put a little comment in here. How about should probably validate to do. Should probably validate the input. And while you're looking at that code, let me get on my little soapbox about validating input. If you're at all interested in secure websites and even working with security, that is one of the biggest vulnerabilities of any website out there. Any website that takes input from the user is inviting hackers to give you input. And hackers, if they have any coding knowledge, will know that, hey, what if I put in single quote, delete databases, or some strange string in there that causes your program to crash and go into debug mode? I can cause your server to give up information about you, or even hack into your database if you're not properly validating input. So input is the huge hole for security. So this is an important thing to do if I were actually going to present a web page. And again, with using React components as my tool for displaying elements, React has built-in security features. Or if something broken in React, I can blame React instead of me doing bad coding. I can say, well, I use the React elements. That is one possible disadvantage. If someone discovers a vulnerability in React, they have hacked the world's websites because so many people are using React. And that's one reason why React is very stable, because it is in so many places. So I think we can trust React more than my own validation at this point, is because React's been out there for so long. But that still is a chance that something broke in React. So if you can find a flaw in React, you could probably get a good ransom for revealing that. But anyway, this is the part where I'm not validating, I'm just checking that they're not blank. I could check to see is their age a reasonable age, like above 18 or something, or not let the value go below a certain value, but that's something I'm not worried about. Main thing here is I want to practice using forms. So now here's the handle submit. This was basically in the example that I simply prevent default alert submit, and that was right there in the, where's the prevent default, or is that something automatically part of handle change? I don't remember seeing the prevent default. I guess it's built into the event, that prevent default. I think they explained that in the W3 Schools tutorial. All right, enough of that. I want to give some time for troubleshooting here. Jonah, what the first one to ask?
I'm
Progress here.
Progress. Just rewriting some of this.
Okay.
Along.
Okay.
So with the table, I will be trying table rows.
Yeah.
That mean that
You always want to put something inside a TD anytime after you start your row. So a TD, table row just means here there's going to be a bunch of TDs now.
So like.
And you don't need the, oh, that's good. Yeah, you didn't have the slide. Okay. That will be one cell. So that now becomes that cell. And then as you put that in a TD, then it'll start fixing it.
Okay. So I'm just gonna start doing TDs everywhere.
TDs around everything that you want in a separate cell. And that'll look better once you get the other ones fixed.
Okay.
And this is what's going on here is your browser is actually rendering it, even though it's a pretty invalid table, it's still rendering it in a decent way rather than using a blank page. Yeah, just keep going. Put them all, and then once you have them all done, they'll all line up nicely. That same thing happened to me as
I was having trouble with the alignment
Yeah.
earlier, but I'm gonna see if fixing all the table stuff will. Because originally I was doing it as I had like a label.
Yeah.
tag.
Yep. And that'll work too. Just the table just makes it look better. It doesn't make it
It
function.
really does. It's yeah. But
Okay, so you're on your row.
I
Wait.
will see if I get this all working.
Okay. Josiah, you're good? Now, once you get the text inputs, remember all I'm asking you is for do some checkboxes and option buttons just to practice using those.
I was gonna ask for the checkboxes. Is there a way you have to have an input for each checkbox, or is there a way to give multiple options? Well, I guess I don't know. I'm trying to figure out like what's the fastest or what's like most efficient way to provide different options for the checkboxes.
You could make, I think, you could make a loop that would render your checkboxes that might loop through. If you want to say, hey, here's your options. That's would be my first approach.
Okay.
Make a checkboxes component
Yeah.
that does it very efficiently. But you could hard code it too.
Just go back to my phone.
Okay. Now this whole thing is in. Let's see where. Maybe I should put a little end here. This is the end of my form way down here. So I'm going to put this here. Go comment. End of my form. Once you get things that are functions that are large, sometimes this really helps in your comments. So you know where that long class is ended. So here's end of my form. Here's the start of my form. This is the whole render part of my form. Here's the start of my form. Way up here. There's the start of my form.
And most of that wasn't in the copy thing.
You're right. Yeah, none of this was in the example. I just basically looked at other examples as they had some of these other things. I saw, oh yeah, they're using those things. And yeah, regarding your checkboxes, if you look at the example of checkboxes there, Josiah, they see that they actually have some checkbox things that you're welcome to use those. They built a checkbox list.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, you can use that as an example. copy paste or use that same kind of technique. So back to yours. Jonathan, did you see what you needed? Do you need to scroll down more on this?
Yeah, I got verified.
That part. And then this is only debugging. This is the part that I check to see whether to enable the submit button. And remember, you can skip the enabling or disabling the submit button until you have everything else working nicely aligned. Then you can come back and put the submit.
Quick question about your verifying submit. Can you scroll down just a bit? What was the line? You have a constant handle submit there?
Nope, it's just
Further down you have
Further
verify
down.
required, and then the handle submit is this. That was just taken right from the example.
So an event.
That was right from the example here.
I think that's from the
That's from the further down.
from the W3 Schools React forums.
Okay, yeah.
But where's that inputs variable for the alert?
That is way up here. That's a use state guy. That's the name of the variable.
Oh.
So use state. That basically think of this as this makes this a nice React handled global variable. So back down here where you're looking, John.
Yeah,
Then the rest is returning the form.
So it's okay.
And I'm recording all this so you can go back if I breeze through something here. How you doing in the front row there? Good? Steven? Think. That a form working? See a form working? And you can always go back and look at that video if there's something missing. Oh, you're using the dip over there. Good. By the end of this week. So Thursday, anything you're stuck on, we can clean up. Go a little further and maybe some example code. Thursday, the plan is Thursday is going to be the last of React. And then after Easter, going to look into jQuery, which is another library listed high on a lot of resumes of expectations for if you know JavaScript. They expect you know React and jQuery, and then there's 1,000 other libraries that you can randomly choose from. Maybe not 1,000, maybe 20. jQuery and React are at the top of the list of anyone doing little more than just really basic JavaScript. You need to be familiar with it. They're not expecting you to be expert, but to have been exposed to it will put your resume higher than everyone else's. That's my goal, is to have you be able to put on your resume, you've seen this and this and this in your JavaScript experience. So they'll say, oh, okay, you learned more than the average student. But even better is you can show them your portfolio of working pages. On your Easter vacation, instead of playing Minecraft, build something else on your portfolio, then go play Minecraft. Speaking of Minecraft,
Can you scroll up?
Oh, yeah.
To the next
up here,
yeah, go further up to the next method that you have called their constant.
the verify required.
Yeah, the verify required. What's above that?
Well, that is the handle change. And remember, handle change is attached to my form somewhere. So anything that changes, I update the values in my values. Think of that as a global variable, my inputs. My values gets updated to be whatever was there. I'm gonna put a little comment here. This is pretty cool code right here. Update values to be what was in it before our current contents plus name.
So what do we call the verify required function?
Right here in the handle change. And where's handle change? Way down. On every input, we have an on change as handle change.
Oh, okay, I need to change something.
In brackets. So
Can I see your handle change function?
yep.
Because I think I accidentally did on change. I just like straight up called or like set the value.
So basically I'm saying, when you give me a change, you're basically sending me, I'm thinking this would actually be, well, it's an event, they treat it like an event. Event.target.name gets me the name of the element, name of changed element. And this gives me the value of that element. And I store it, the name pair, in this values array. Update my values array with that named pair. Value, a key, some call it a key dash key in a value. Some like to use the word name.
So that goes inside the function my form.
Yeah, this is part of the handle. This is part of my form. Yeah, this is a sub method of my form. It's an event. We're saying handle change is this anonymous function that takes a parameter event. And since we see this a lot, you need to recognize this format. I could have said function handle change bracket event this, but because you see this in so much code, I'm wanting to use that, get used to that. Handle change is assigned as an anonymous function. That anonymous function is assigned to the handle change variable. That is one thing that's kind of confusing of any programming language. As it becomes more mature, there are different ways of doing the same thing. And you're going to have to learn both ways because you're going to be reading code from people that do it one way or another.
And then for this name tag here, for the constant, should that be our tag from below? So my code did this apparently initially just had this.
Oh, right, because you just assign on change to be this anonymous function. So instead of that, you can just say equals handle change.
Okay, but then it needs like handle change right up here, correct?
Yeah. With the code that I have there. That'll do the same thing as that.
Values that I'm trying to.
No. All you do is that, and handle change see what's happening there. This basically means I can use the same function to handle the change for any input. Because it says, oh, what's the name of your input? What's the value assigned to that input? I'm going to put it in this inputs variable that keeps track of all my inputs. So values becomes a collection of what all your input values are. Rather than writing a separate event for name, for age, for email, just whenever anything's changed, update the values array or list with the new value for that particular thing, and any other values are also stored in that. That means whatever is already there, add or replace the new name and value in this values array. This is a really powerful line right there, letting you update and just keep track of all your inputs right here. You don't have to write a separate handler for each one. Maybe I should put some comments about that because I forgot to comment that carefully. I'll add a comment. And then one thing I remember, don't forget to do the Control S or your sandbox code is gone if it times out. So do Control S right now.
Then we call verify required.
Yeah, and that's this function that basically looks through all the required elements to see if they're blank or not, only to enable or disable the submit button. So you don't have to put verify required.
Where do we set the set inputs to be a function?
That's just part of this right here. This makes the function set inputs.
Oh, I think I'm missing that.
Use state returns a
So
value and a function.
So I can get rid of all my extra use states. Okay, so I was just being completely redundant.
Yeah.
Use state input.
Redundantly redundant, were you?
Only worry. Did I just break everything?
Probably. Typical code. You fix one thing and everything else breaks until you put the right number of curly braces in or something.
Well, I meant.
Now, I haven't done any of the checkboxes or radio buttons yet, but you have the example there in the W3 Schools example, and that's where you have to exercise your skills, reading through that, either writing or copy pasting what you need and modifying it. And don't forget the Control S so you don't lose your input. Okay, John. Probably just one little thing here.
So I normally have them all set to individuals, but do these all just get changed to input? And then handle change?
No.
No?
You're close though.
Silly question.
Value equals inputs dot username. And that inputs variable now, once you have that inputs variable, state variable, you can reference each part of that inputs variable that was set way at the top. So the inputs variable right here is basically tracking all input name value pairs.
And then we set handle change. And I am
Inputs dot username. So there's an example in my comments. When I want to access anything in that inputs variable, in the state variable, here's what I put. Inputs dot username. And this means if it's blank, if it hasn't been set a value, then show nothing. Instead of an error message or undefined.
Alright, so for one last thing it looks like. So my old display method was this, but these were all dependent on it.
Yeah, so the inputs dot
So I
first
just add
name.
the input for it.
Yeah, just like you did on the inputs. Yeah, just put inputs dot, and I think it'll fix it.
Oh, that's not good.
Well, check the error message.
Verify required.
What's it saying? Cannot set properties of no. Setting disabled. So where are you setting disabled? Oh, look, I can see the red line right there.
Why is that?
Well, did you give the submit button an ID?
That might do it. Let's submit.
ID equals submit. That shows you where it helps to read the error messages.
So right now I disabled it.
Good. So it's not requiring full.
No, and this would be these three just required.
Okay. There you go.
This is all you.
Yeah.
It's not handling it.
Yeah, that's fine.
This is all you need for output.
Yep. The main thing is practicing using the React method of doing the form, where we could do it with JavaScript and HTML in 20 minutes.
So really,
Learn to use React. Yeah.
so I've added all of these, but I'm not. Do you want me to add like so like when I hit submit that it gives says like what the user picked for these?
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
You can just to test that it works.
I did it for all the text boxes.
Yeah, that's fine.
And then select the element, but
The main thing is writing a form and learning the React version of forms. Because forms are going to be your first thing you'll ever write, and then it's the code behind it to run the game that you're having that form, and of course, thinking of the security part of it, that's huge. But everyone needs to know how to do a form in about every web-based language.